Welcome to Perspectives online and on air from WFSU Public Media. I'm Tom Flanigan. This program, using the Zoom platform, was pre-recorded on Tuesday, January 19th for playback on Thursday, January the 21st, with the program appearing both on WFSU FM and the WFSU Public Media Facebook page. Well, you probably have noticed that the way in which many of our towns and cities is organized is not really an accident. Any community where the streets are laid out in a grid, creating a series of squares, dates back several centuries, actually. And some notable examples of that just here in North Florida would include, well, Tallahassee and Apalachicola. And on today's Perspectives, we're going to be talking with some folks who are deeply involved in restoring Apalachicola's historic city center to a squared configuration as it was historically. And we're going to find out what this nod to the town's past will mean potentially to its future. It's an exciting project, and we got some exciting folks to talk about it here on Perspectives. And let's go around the old Zoom grid, since we're talking squares, and meet everyone who's going to be a part of the conversation today. First is Diane Brewer, retired banker who moved to Apalachicola because it is still an authentic historic town, always interested in preservation. She was inspired by the groundbreaking work of Willoughby Marshall to take on the role of project manager pro bono to restore Apalachicola's historic squares. She also put together the rest of this outstanding panel. We are forever in your debt, Diane Brewer, and welcome to Perspectives. It's so good to hear you and see you today.
You're welcome.
We also say hi to Camilo Romero, a senior at the FAMU FSU College of Engineering, less than a stone's throw away from WFSU, graduating this April with a civil environmental degree. Camilo primarily focused his efforts on the construction engineering scope in this senior design project. And I can't wait to delve into that. Camilo, thank you so much for joining us on Perspectives today. It's good to have you on.
Thank you for having me.
All right, we move over to John Travis Mashall, Associate Professor of Law at Georgia State University, where he teaches environmental law, land use law, and property law. Interested in how local laws and local governments can improve resilience to disasters and economic shocks. Gee, I don't know what kind of disaster could ever fall a coastal town like Apalachicola, but I'm sure we'll find out. Prior to entering law teaching, John left his law practice in Tampa and then joined the New Orleans Redevelopment Authority, NORA, as it's known, as a project manager and counsel. And for 4 years, he helped implement post-Hurricane Katrina urban revitalization efforts for neighborhoods throughout Orleans Parish. Big job, John, and thank you for joining this panel today. That'll be fascinating in the extreme, too, to see what kind of resilience ideas you have for Apalachicola, sir.
Thanks, Tom. Looking forward to sharing.
We have also, speaking of marshals, Marie Marshall, although formerly retired in 2003 as a healthcare administrator here in Florida. Marie has a master's graduate degree from Fordham University, continues her professional role as an educator while serving as vice president of Bring Me a Book Franklin, an early literacy effort dedicated to preschoolers. There is an educational component in this whole project. And Marie, we're going to tap your expertise in that direction and beyond, if that's okay today.
Thank you, Tom. And John and I are related. We're a mother's son team following the legacy of my husband, Willoughby, and his dad. So nice to be with you.
What a wonderful legacy and continuation of what is, to a large degree, a family affair. So it's good to have the Marshall clan well represented today in the discussion, folks. Well, Tallahassee is one of the seething hotbeds of legalistic pursuit. we have to have a barrister on board today, and that is Robert Volpe, a land use attorney with the law firm of Hopping, Green and Sams here in Tallahassee. Robert advises the foundation on this project as well as their other endeavors in the city of Apalachicola. It's good to get those I's dotted and T's crossed. Robert, thanks for your input today.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Tom. I'm glad to be here, and I've enjoyed working on this project with the team.
Let's get the 30,000-foot overview. And Diane Brewer, if I can throw that to you, the genesis of this whole initiative to take the city of Apalachicola back to its historic configuration when it comes to the streets, the historic squares, all that. Where did that come from? Was that just someone came up with the idea, the Marshall Plan, or somebody else? How did that happen?
Well, actually, I'm glad you asked that. That's a great place to start. I'm going to start with my involvement, and I'm going to back into where the project really started. But my involvement and awareness of the situation became about a year after I moved here. Although I was long aware of Apalachicola's history and appeal as a historic, authentic town, and had visited it many times, it takes, as often it does, a crisis to be a catalyst to action. So the catalyst for that came about after a year after I moved here. The CVS drugstore chain had applied to the city to build a mega store of 12,000 square feet in size, covering a couple of lots on our major highway 98, which runs through town, abutting one of the city's squares and its historic cemetery. So I was appalled that that could even be considered, and to see what protections there were for and the city in general, the historic district of the town in general. So that's how I got started. So the involvement in this project more formalized along the path of that being the beginning. So there were many more steps in the road, which we can come to later, but this might be a good point to go back to what really got this started. Was Willoughby Marshall, retired, now passed away architect and native of Apalachicola, inspired me because of his groundbreaking work in 1975, which created the historic district here in Apalachicola. And it was his dream to protect and restore the squares, the 6 historic squares of Apalachicola. And I learned about it because of the crisis appearing that they might be further damaged. So that got me back. I backed into the limelight with that.
Okay, but Marie Marshall, then you picked up your late husband's mantle, if you will, to help to advance this project, to move it forward, along with help from son John. Was that part of the genesis of this as well?
Really, this Yankee married this native of Apalachicola 50 some odd years ago. We've died this past June, and we always went home to visit his mother, we eventually settled back into the family home in the late 80s, but I always worked with him as I worked my own profession of education mainly, and shared his dream. He was a man who held on to his dreams and sought to try to bring them to reality. But this plan of his, which is we'll say memorialized in the volume that's we republished in 2009, talked about the restoration of the town plan from the 1830s, specifically the squares that could be used as outdoor living rooms. And so in the late 80s, he and a like-minded group of mostly Apalachicola natives formed the Historic Apalachicola Foundation. And I've been working nights after a day at my own work with him and helping to move it along. We saw together the reality. And then it happened with the Gibson Inn's birth in the early 90s. That was the really first big step toward preserving the sticks and stones that were there. And then gradually folks saw the potential there in historic fabric. And so it's grown slowly and become a place to come and be refreshed and savor the history and enjoy the sea, which is at its feet. And
Well,
so, yeah, I'm continuing. All of our kids are interested in interested in it, and one is teaching in that field. Preservation is part of his journey too. But that's a life lived out. You know, it's been a good journey.
Well, that's a nice segue to another fellow traveler on that journey, John Marshall. To the perhaps casual observer, it seems when you drive through Apalachicola, John, not just on 98, but you detour on some of the side streets and back alleyways and all that, your impression is of a city that is fairly well preserved already. Why is it necessary to, I guess, restore what was there historically? What difference will that make, do you think?
Yeah, so I think a few points, Tom, are important to consider. And Diane and Robert and Camilo will pick up on these points and additional ones, but a few include just the landmark status, the landmark nature of the town plan itself, the fact that this is a way of the city renewing itself and driving forward economic development. And also there's an opportunity here, I think, Tom, day after Martin Luther King's birthday, for thinking about equity and community development and how this effort to restore 4 city squares across the entire fabric of the city, the entire layout of the city, gives a chance for all neighborhoods in the city to join in the growth and development of the city in a very special way. So just on the first point quickly, Tom, the Apalachicola has, as many have taught me, and my dad and my mom, I learned from great teachers, talked about the various eras of development of the city. So starting with the cotton era in the middle of the 19th century, moving to the lumber era that straddled the move into the 20th century, and then the great era of commercial fishing that we all know. And then most lately, what drew us all to Apalachicola as visitors and from far and wide is heritage tourism and seeing the historic nature and fabric of the city. I think one of the things that's wonderful about the squares and realizing the city plan is that there's nothing gimmicky about this. So many cities across the country and in Florida have to look for certain types of gimmicks, the Ferris wheel, what have you, to bring people home or bring people to the city. But there are historic and current drivers of growth that are genuine and rooted in the city. And that's what's so special, I think, about this initiative. As I was thinking for today, I thought, Tom, of the ancient Greek term of nostos and coming home and returning home. And really, this is at the root, I think, of what we understand to be nostalgia. And I think a lot of people feel that for Apalachicola. It reaches back to a point in our past, but also our present, that's grounding for us. And it's wonderful awakening of interest in the city in the return to thinking about the squares. So I think that's to be celebrated. The other is just the personal view, Tom. You probably have walked the streets like Diane and my mom, and Camilo has in his work, and Robert, but early in the morning or late at night, the alleys, the streets, the squares as they exist now, create really special vistas to the river and to the bay, and to other points of interest like Lafayette Park or Battery Park throughout the city. So the designers of the city over almost 2 centuries ago had something in mind, that the integrity of the city plan tied the city together and created a wonderful asset for its citizens, as my mom Marie was saying, a type of living room for the city. And then finally, I think this is so important at this time, just to say that we love downtown Apalachicola, and we love the water, but there are so many other corners of the city, and there are corners of the city where development hasn't occurred at the same pace. And I think that the Squares project allows, particularly in our historically African-American neighborhoods in the city, a grounding and an asset that all sectors of the city can build on, not just in terms of value of real estate, but in terms of open spaces for people to enjoy, whether it's civic events, neighborhood events, family events. That's something that I think all families can appreciate. And it's just one piece of the community development puzzle. But if we can get this piece of the puzzle right, other pieces of the puzzle can fall in line and help create opportunities for investment that will help all sectors of the city.
A major part of that puzzle piece, though, has to be the redesign, the reimagining, if you will, of what was historically there. And Camila Romero, that is where you come in. First of all, how did you get involved in this? Did these guys just come to you and say, hey, we need a plan, can you help us out, or what happened?
So I was in a group, and I wanted to give a shout out to them, Shelby, Megan, and Jessica. Together, we had a group of senior design, and we were trying to figure out what our project was going to be that we were going to work on for 2 semesters. And then one class session, Marie and Diane actually came to class and presented what they were doing with the historic Apalachicola Foundation. And we just knew we wanted to be a part of their story. We knew like our project, we just didn't want it to be a normal report just to turn in for a grade. We wanted to find something that would actually bring some goodness to an area. And so we were just on board from the start. And once we looked at the plans that they gave us, like some aerial footages and hearing what they wanted to do, because one saying that like stood out to us from Diane was squares should be squares. And so when we looked at the current intersection with Avenue D and 14th Street, we just knew it wasn't possible because it was separated into 4 different sectors and there wasn't a coherent central space. So with that, we just came up with different ideas of how we could like reroute the traffic to make sure we wouldn't interrupt the current flow, but still create a central space that would be able for recreation. And so what Megan did was she created this square roundabout shape, kind of think of like the outline of an app on your phone. And with that, we'd have yielding signs and easily accessible pedestrian access where it would just create this smooth overall function that would deliver the overall mission of what this group was trying to do and help us complete this project for our professor and to pass our class as well.
Well, I got to ask you, in the original configuration of 6 squares in Apalachicola, how many of the original structures that occupied those squares are still there? And how many did you have to say, okay, that isn't there anymore, but there's opportunities perhaps for some kind of, I don't know, amenable modern development that would not fly in the face of what was there at one time?
Well, I can't speak too specifically to that. When this project was presented to us, it was the focus was Chapman Square, and so that was our main assessment was looking at that one. My 3 teammates did go out to the sites and did visit the other squares, and we have pictures that helped us kind of like gauge a sense of what the size was and what each one would bring to the town. And so we just made sure that what we were doing at Chapman Square specifically would have a transferable concept that could be easily applied to those other areas, just to ensure that we'd renovate their original intention of those squares to be how they were.
Okay, very good. But still, history moves on. What was yesterday may not be today. And whenever you get into any kind of redevelopment, you are into a potential legal morass. Robert Volpe, what did you see going into this project? What were the pitfalls and how do you kind of work around that to realize what we're talking about today?
Well, thanks, Tom. I'd like to go back, and first I was inspired by Willoughby's work, and Marie held up a copy of his study, that economic development through historic preservation. When we talk about squares, the entire city is laid out in a grid, but there are certain areas where originally the roads dead-ended into a public space, and the roadway would go around this public square, a park, or other. There's a city center square, the largest square, Washington Square. And each of these squares was named and designated as a gathering place, a park. A good example of this is in Savannah. There are, in the downtown historic Savannah, where the grid pattern roads dead end into an open public space. And over time, the squares in Apalachicola have been bisected by roads that essentially go straight through them. The opportunity is that the city owns the majority of the properties around those intersections. So restoring the squares is really an engineering challenge, more so than it partially is a legal challenge, but the engineering challenge is to reroute the roads and the pedestrian access, the stormwater and other infrastructure in a way that restores these previously public spaces back into a place that can be used by the public. Chapman Square was the initial focus of this project because the city owns all four corners of Chapman Square, which are currently bisected. But this was proposed to the students as an opportunity to be creative and think about how to take that engineering challenge and turn it back into a public space. Moving forward, there will be some conversations and initiatives with the city. We would expect that there are plenty of supporters in the city leadership and also citizens of Apalachicola. But this is a quality of life type project. It will cost money to do the engineering and some of the work as this moves forward. And those are the conversations that we're going to have with the city and with other leadership in Apalachicola, because these kinds of quality of life projects radiate to surrounding neighborhoods, to economic development, and to businesses. So we're encouraged by the work that the students have done. They laid the groundwork. I will say that this partnership with FSU, FAMU College of Engineering, the work done by the students is as professional of a job as I've ever seen from any professional engineering firm. I'm very impressed by the work that they did, and being able to take that groundwork and then move that forward as something that comes into fruition. We're excited about taking the next step there.
We're talking about the reimagination of the historic squares, all 6 of them, ultimately, in the coastal community of Apalachicola, the county seat of Franklin County out in the Florida Panhandle, on Perspectives from WFSU Public Media. Hey, if you miss all or part of the program, it's always available online, not just on our WFSU.org website, but also our WFSU Public Media Facebook page. We try to have it up as quick as we can after the program actually airs on the radio, and then you can go back and listen to it as many times as you want, and also see the participants if you're joining us on Facebook. Diane Brewer, I think Robert Volpe just hit on an interesting side note that not only is it going to take funding, and we know how much of a challenge that could be in just about any avenue of redevelopment right now, but also buy-in from the rest of the community. So does the foundation and its project, its objectives have total buy-in from all the folks in Apalachicola? Have you gotten any pushback? What's the situation there?
That's a good question. I've been working on this project for a few years now, not as many as the Marshalls did or Willoughby, but we have gained a lot of traction and support over the past 5 years. And I'm glad to say that I'm encouraged by that. And, we put into place a few things that will keep us moving forward in the right direction. We have gotten feedback and comments along the way, which is good because we need to know where those concerns are so that we can address them or allay them, because I have heard all kinds of comments that were unfounded that give me awareness of there's a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding about what this project may be about. So that is good for us to know. So we have gotten indications, both positive and some negative, or concerns like someone was concerned that we were going to move Dr. Gorey's grave off of Gorey Square again, which is not true. Somebody else made some comment that we were going to tear down everything, including people's houses that were on the squares. No, there are no houses on the squares. So that brings to the forefront of my awareness the issues and concerns that people very realistically have. So we need to allay those fears. So having said that, every time there is an opportunity to make this long-range project known, I take advantage of it through various means. In fact, I have to say I'm thrilled at the involvement of FSU and indebted to them for three things. First of all, the squares were the subject of a local roots PBS presentation for about 5 minutes that we did last year. And we wouldn't have been able to have the incredibly wonderful work that FAMU FSU College of Engineering did if it weren't for FSU's embrace. So those are two that I can't be more vociferous about my thanking FSU and WFSU. So thank you again. So having said that, those are some of the things that enable us to reach out beyond what visitors who come to Apalachicola actually see. In fact, in a lot of places, there really is nothing to see. And we really, the long-range goal of this project is to be able to enable the squares to be seen, and they need to be restored and improved to make them the visible public spaces that they were and should be. So the other things that have been miraculously fallen into my lap are two colleagues of mine, one a community, now a board member of the historic Apalachicola Historic Society, and a former city planner for the city of Apalachicola. The three of us wrote a brochure highlighting the history of Apalachicola's grid and its 6 city squares. It never had such a document before. So now that has gotten a lot of distribution. So we're glad of that. And the other organizations, the Historic Society, Rotary, have given us some encouragement along the way. So I take all of those opportunities to tell people about the squares. In fact, probably people would wish I would stop talking about the squares. In fact, I've been becoming known as the Square Lady. So there are lots more steps along the way, but the ones that the enthusiasm and encouragement and objections that we've heard so far have helped us, and we're forward along the path. And of course, not be done or implemented without the committee's and the approval of the city commission, which owns the land under almost 5 of the city squares. They own less than all of one and all the rest of the rest. So they own 4 completely. The 5th one is they owned partially, and the 6th one, sadly, was sold in the past about 50 years ago. So we have a lot of work left to do, but we've made a lot of progress.
Well, the Square Lady, I can certainly think of worse paths to notoriety, Diane. That's pretty cute. I like that. Marie Marshall, since you're an educator, let's talk about history and what it means to reclaim at least a portion of the community's historical background, its layout, its iconic street configuration. Really, what does that mean? Why is that important, do you think?
Well, just continuing on from Diane's point, education is the greatest imperative that we have. Preservation always has battles attached to it in terms of bringing people to an understanding of what you're about, because usually the issues are bigger than ourselves. but they're beyond our imagining because in terms of space, we're used to what is, and to see what could be is always a challenge. John, I was thinking of your time in New Orleans after Katrina, where you worked. How did education play into that time?
Oh gosh, well, I think that there's education that goes both ways, right? So as Robert and Diane were saying, and as you were just saying, Mom, there's a two-way road insofar as a lot of listening has to occur with respect to what the community wants to see. And then it's, as Robert laid out, and Diane, you were saying, wonderful history to the squares themselves. And I think that naturally, because the squares exist in a mostly undeveloped state now, there's not an idea of what the vision, the future vision could be, and how it could promote development across the city. I think that's the beauty of Camilo's work and his colleagues at the College of Engineering at FAMU and FSU, is they create, they give flesh to that vision, which is so important. So I think, that's the sort of critical connection for education, in brief summary.
Okay.
And I don't know if I answered your question fully in terms of the history. I think we always are measured by the present if we take a look at the past. If you visit Williamsburg, they have a wonderful public education session that talks about that, how the past is the measure of what is the present and what is to be, and to be conscious of that history. For this little coastal town that was born in the 1831, it was laid out, modeled after Philadelphia with its squares, and that's how Willoughby was sitting in an architecture, history of architecture class at Notre Dame in the 1940s, and the prof drew Philadelphia with its squares, and he said, I had lived in the town for almost 20 years, but never realized there were squares there. And that, then he wrote to the then city clerk, who still has relatives in town, Mr. Dodd, and said, this is what I'm thinking, having learned this, is it true? And Mr. Dodd took a month to research it and called him and said, yes, it is modeled after Philadelphia. So then that always was in his mind. He practiced in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and various other places, but he would come home to visit the family home, which his mother kept until her death. And he had that vision. So in 1973, we applied for a HUD grant to bring the planning and the thought into to formalize it. And then he assembled a team of wonderful young people, two of whom I hope will come. We're planning a symposium in Apalachicola, and Ed Kelly and Paula Cortez were part of the team with WIB, and we brought students from the University of Notre Dame down, and WIB's mother cooked for them, put them up. And so we had, again, I want to compliment Camila and his wonderful teammates. Young minds are so creative, and they're what you've done for us, Camila, and your fellow classmates is such a gift, and we have to treasure the state system too. I want to give credit to the Florida higher education system. We have a wonderful jewel there, and they're examples of that jewel. So long and short, we're blessed by history there, and now there are wonderful, as another generation of folks. I'm 86, and there are newly retireds who've come in and have appreciated what's there and are worker bees and have brought their brilliant minds too. So.
Well, Camila Romero, you have certainly been the target of some accolades here. So let's talk about some of the challenges that you and your colleagues had beyond what you'd already discussed when it was, oops, wait a second, the new road goes this way, the old road went that way, we can't put it back exactly the way it was. We'll have to modify it somehow. But and looking to this old coastal town and trying to recreate it while still not just slavishly following the past. How did you guys do that? And also, where can we get a picture of the overall concept that you guys came up with?
Okay, great question. I think Diane has a copy. If not, I can forward you a picture of our drawings that you can include. As for other challenges we faced, main one we had was site grading. Being so close to the coast, we knew flooding could be a big issue. We knew that currently there's one part of the section that flooding does happen. So Jess did a lot of analysis on the earthwork just to make sure, literally laid the foundation so Shelby could create enough elevation work so that we would tie into the current underwater stormwater system. That way we wouldn't have to sacrifice any of the space of the square for a stormwater pond and just let it all be like a flat area where everyone could walk on. Because we just felt that it wouldn't look as nice as having like a pond. I'm sorry. Just having a pond in the center just wouldn't have been as nice as being able just to walk everywhere and just enjoy the space for what it could be at its full maximum.
Okay, yeah. Just a stormwater pond it's a nice amenity, but you can't do much with it. But here, if I can flip over to you, John Marshall, since you had all of that connection with what happened in New Orleans during Katrina, we know with sea level rise and the fact that Apalachicola is a coastal community, we do have that possibility of flooding, particularly during a hurricane-induced storm surge. Is that also a factor in recreating these squares to make them, in your words, more resilient than otherwise they might be?
Thanks, Tom. And I'm so glad, Camila, you reminded us of the stormwater drainage issues. And so I think that's a great question. And it's a nice example too, right? So drawing on the comments that Robert had about planning and the importance of planning, talking about what my mom Marie just said about the 1975 study, a good plan here with respect to what the squares can do, Tom, can help leverage funding as we move forward. This project will unfold over probably the course of a couple of decades, but if the planning documents aren't in place, then funding institutions, whether they be public or private, or other nonprofit entities that are willing to pitch in, they won't do so unless there are good planning documents that they can look at. So to answer your point squarely, Tom, knowing something about the geography of the city, one of the lower lying areas of the city is the historically African-American part of the city. And that's just part of the topography, the original topography of the city that you can see in the underlay of the original 1834 city plan. And it's the folks who drafted the plan show the underlying natural features. And so you can see the old sort of ponds and streams that were in parts of the city. And though there are low-lying areas on both sides in all neighborhoods in the city, I think it's a great example of where if you can plan, right, for handling stormwater in a way that isn't just, like Camila said so well, not just a pond, but you can create water retention and detention areas that are an aesthetic feature that not only bring people to look at the feature, but they relieve people of some of the stormwater drainage problems that prevent them from living the type of daily lives that they would like to live, particularly in the event of a major storm. And Tom, if I could just tag on one thing there, since disaster law is one of the areas that I do a lot of thinking about. The squares, though, they serve many purposes before this in terms of squares as locus for civic life, community economic development, neighborhood gathering spaces, etc. In times of crisis and disaster, we actually look to public spaces to serve as triage points, temporary housing points. And so redeveloped squares would be close to hookups or have hookups to water, to electricity. They would have open spaces in a way that they're not open and connected now. So that in times of crisis, when you need 9 months or a year, and you want to keep people in town, because any small town, what kills a small town at a time of disaster is when folks leave Apalachicola and they move to Tallahassee or Panama City, and then their kids are in schools there. They never come back. But in desperate times of desperate need, as we've seen right there next door in Port St. Joe, Mexico Beach, Panama City, if you have well-located public spaces with the basic amenities, you also have what can be a disaster mitigation and resilience tool as far as helping a community bounce back in the event of a disaster. So though this is certainly tertiary to all these other great goals, I think that Romero's point about stormwater drainage feeds into this issue of disaster and hazard mitigation as well.
Yes, but the other facet of that, and Robert Volpe, you may have some insight in this area, when you were talking about any kind of disaster mitigation, when you're talking about stormwater handling, when you're talking about community redevelopment, historic preservation, all of these kinds of things. We may be facing a $2 billion shortfall potentially here in the state of Florida when it comes to the state budget, but there are still grants available out there for those sorts of things, are there not, that maybe could lend a hand in this project?
That's right. There are, and as we talk about next steps for this project, one of those will be to seek out the right types of grants and funding that match these community development initiatives, these quality of life type projects. Small towns like Apalachicola, there are several different options there from the federal and state level, and we're looking to our local community partners, the city and other organizations that Diane mentioned, to help partner on these types of initiatives. There are several different options for funding, whether it's directly in the city's infrastructure work plan, partnered with other projects, maybe renovations to the master stormwater plan, or other infrastructure needs. And then there are the more direct grant funding that could be used for historic preservation, because really when you get down to this project, it is a historic preservation initiative of a public owned space. And along the same lines, we're looking back, but we're also looking forward. And I have the pleasure to work on a lot of new urbanism designed communities. There are several examples along the Big Bend coast, west of Apalachicola. And many of those communities are designed with this same idea in mind, of the centerpiece being a public square where the community gathers, whether it's for celebration or if sometimes necessary in times of crisis, or for conversation. Community squares were the first place of First Amendment rights, was you gathered in the square to have your conversations. It's fascinating to me to work on a project where the new urbanists are redesigning cities in this way that existed 200 years ago in Apalachicola. And although we're looking back, we're also moving this forward to match up with what the current planning world sees as the best design. And I will say many of my planner friends and colleagues have Mr. Marshall's book on their shelf, because his work of Apalachicola, it informs a lot of things that are done on brand new developments along 30A or other areas.
You hearken to something that we saw the beginning of here in Tallahassee, now a nationwide movement to try to reconcile differing political and other opinions in a civil and civilized manner, a little group called the Village Square. There's a reason, you're right, Robert, that those sorts of places have become just synonymous with that sort of sitting down and trying to work out our divisions and problems and all of that. Time frame, Diane Brewer, how do you see this playing out over what space of time? When can we expect to see at least the first square, and then its sisters and brothers coming online?
Good question. Marie and I, under the auspices of the Historic Apalachicola Foundation, charged the FAMU FSU College of Engineering senior team with creating a template that could be applied to any and of the other squares, and they chose Chapman to work on and there was an alternative too that also could have been worked on, because the city owns all 4 quadrants of these particular squares, and there are the fewest amounts of development components, that few amounts of obstacles. So they chose Chapman Square to work on, but it is a repeatable template that can be applied to other squares. So I can't say enough about the wonderful work they did, because it is not solely conceptual. It really went into great detail. The most visible feature of a redesigned square is having the traffic go around it, not through it, as it currently does, which dates back to when the automobile was coming into popularity. So moving the streets off the squares was the first and the most important goal. Having the one square restored, which is to answer your question, is the most immediate near-term goal. But I have to say much work needs to be done, because not only does the community have to embrace the restoration, the city commission has to approve it, and they have to approve any grants that are applied for. So I view that as maybe we probably won't get in the on-deck circle, if to use a baseball metaphor, for maybe 2 years. So I think it will take us a year to gain much more public support for the idea of doing them, for many, many, many reasons. And then the city's approval will flow from the community's approbation, and then grants can be applied for. So I think it's probably a 2-3 year time horizon to approach getting one square done. And once we get one done, which Camilo and his team finally also put together a time frame for construction, once the community sees something, they'll say, yes, I want that on that square. So once you can see it, it will be more compelling when they have a point of reference. So I'm really excited about the rest of the road as I am about what has preceded it.
Final comments, folks, as time has been flying by here this hour, and we certainly do appreciate it. Diane, any final thoughts from you? We have about a minute each to wrap up, please.
I just want to add 2 things. The Apalachicola project, Restoring the Historic Squares, has the ability to be communicated with and communicate via a Facebook page, which is under his Apalachicola's Historic Squares. You can reach me through Gmail address, restoresquares2020@gmail.com. You can request a copy of brochure, information, keep track of our progress, join us and contribute, and we would love to we welcome all comers. Thank you very much, FSU, for giving us so many treasures today.
Thank you, Diane. Marie Marshall, you're up next.
Well, I'm glad I'm following the optimist in the group. It's taken 47 years to get a conversation like this, really walking and talking. And I think we need leadership within the community, elected leaders as well as voluntary leaders, to grasp the good that will be brought. And so I'm hopeful. I would maybe double your 2 years, Diane, and still be an optimist and say 4. But it's a wonderful town, and its people have always been a treasure, and they're continuing to be. Thank you, Tom, so much. And again, to our state university college system, our gratitude for all you are and do.
Okay, well, we'll let son John Marshall take over from there, sir.
Thanks, Tom. I guess the last thing I would say is that our neighborhoods where these squares are located, they're really the engines of our cities, little and small, little and big. And they help make them special places of culture and beauty and celebration. And so I think this project is in support of that. And then Tom, just a last shout out to one of my mentors at the University of Florida, Professor Roy Hunt, who worked so hard with my dad and others to help promote preservation in Apalachicola. There are so many who've had their hands in this effort. He's one of them. Many are going unmentioned, but Diane and Robert and my mom and Camilo are carrying on the work of so many great people who are with us and those who have gone before us, and we're grateful for all their efforts.
Thank you, John. A final word from one of the great designers, Camilo Romero, sir.
Yeah, we were just really happy to be a part of this project and just creating something that'd be accessible to all in the community and just restore the town's historic identity. It was just a really cool experience. And while we worked on the project, we often talked about just how surreal it would be in like a few years to come back and just see, what we were working on just in full scale in real life.
And the plan was made flesh, I think is the old saying on that. Counselor, last word from you, Robert Volpe.
Thank you, Tom. I've been inspired in working on this project by those who came before me that have worked on it for years and years, by the work of Willoughby Marshall. And I've been inspired by the creativity and the fresh perspective from the student group. I think it was visionary of Marie and Diane to partner with FSU, FAMU College of Engineering, and the students brought a fresh perspective. They brought creative engineering design. I know that all four of them will have great careers in front of them as professional engineers, and I've been inspired by both the prior and the future. There may be some hurdles ahead of us, but I think that we have community buy-in, we have encouragement from neighbors and groups and the city commission and other leaders. And we look forward to taking this initial plan and restoring the squares and restoring Apalachicola, the historic area, to its glory.
It'll be a sight to see, the historic Apalachicola City Squares resurrection. Thanks to all of our panelists today, folks, and good luck with the project. And we're so happy you could appear on Perspectives, which is produced by WFSU Public Media in Tallahassee. Also, thanks to Taylor Cox, Paul Dam, Amy Diaz de Villegas, Brandon Brown, Tricia Moynihan, and Lydell Ross, our Director of Content, Kim Kelling, Executive Producer, and I'm Tom Flanigan. We've had such a good time in Apalachicola today. We're going to return next week and head out onto the river of the same name. The dispute over that river's water has been elevated now, as you may have heard, to U.S. Supreme Court consideration. And there's a restorative moratorium on oyster harvesting in the Rivers Bay. We're going to talk about that and much more next week, right here on Perspectives from WFSU Public Media. Take care.